to the first official video in my Lancaster reproduction series. In this video, I'll be showcasing the firearm and talking about some of its most notable and intriguing features. This video will be broken up into 5 parts, talking about the barrels, the ejector, the receiver, the trigger, and the internal firing pin inside of it. So let's get started. First up, we have the 4 barrels. They are arguably the most noticeably distinct feature of this firearm. What is actually interesting about them is that they are all machined out of a solid piece of metal. So they are not welded together, nor are they held together by any other additional hardware. Additionally, what's very interesting about this firearm is the distance between the barrels. So I took a caliber and I measured what is the distance between each of these barrels. And I compared that from the tip of the barrel to the back of it, where we load the bullets. And now this firearm, it's from the 1800s, but it did use brass cartridges. So these diameters are actually larger back here so that you can actually fit the bullet casing in there. However, despite these diameters being larger, what I found is that the spacing between the barrels back here is much larger than at the front of the gun. And what that tells me is that these barrels are actually slightly angled from one another. Now, what this tells me is that there is some point past the front of the barrel where all 4 of the barrels will converge to one central location. And as I work on measuring the barrels and reverse engineering them, I will then hopefully be able to determine what that distance is that the center line of all 4 of those barrels will converge. That is what would then be considered the optimal firing distance for this firearm. Now, probably the most interesting aspect of the barrels has to be the rifling on it. Now I'm going to take a piece of paper here to kind of help us see down in them. And so as you can see, they're smooth, so they're smooth bore, but actually what they are is they're oval bore. And you can see it here in the top right a little bit in the glare, the slight deformation of the barrel. And what it is there's actually an oval twist going down the barrel. And what this does is it allows for any bullet that's put into these barrels to have a twist as it comes out. Or what you can also do is you can put shot in these barrels and shoot, say like a 410 shotgun shell through here, and it won't cause any damage to the barrel because it's smooth bore like a shotgun. And the oval bore rifling in this pistol was actually developed by Charles W. Lancaster. The last thing in regards to the barrels that I want to talk about are the markings on them. On the left side of the barrels here, the first thing that we have is the caliber that this is chambered in. It is .476 CF, or 476 centerfire. Also on the top here, flip this around, it says Charles Lancaster, patent 151, New Bond Street, London. Which Charles Lancaster, that's the company and the person that developed this, saying that they have a patent for it, and then 151 New Bond Street, London, is actually where their facility was located in London. And then the last thing is on the barrels and also on the receiver here too, we have proofs for when they tested these barrels to make sure that they could withstand the pressure required for this caliber. So we have proofs on each of the barrels and subsequently the receiver where those barrels are. And here on the other side too, 3 proofs on each one. And now we will move on to the extractor. Now the extractor on this is actually very interesting. With most shotguns, they are somewhat exposed from the barrels, whereas with this Lancaster pistol, the extractor is fully encased within the barrel machining itself. And what's interesting about that is usually when you have, say, your over-under shotguns, you'll have some sort of an extractor on the side. When you have shotguns that are side-by-side barrel, actually what happens is the extractor is underneath the 2 barrels. So it's not actually integrated into the barrels, so like when it breaks down, the extractor is actually underneath it and it's hidden by part of the receiver that usually hangs underneath the front of the barrel and kind of leads itself into the stock there. But with this Lancaster pistol, it's interesting because the extractor is fully integrated into the barrel itself and completely hidden within it. And you can see the little star here, or little cross that it makes. And here it is as it's actually like showing how it would be extracting the cartridges that are in there. But it's fully encased within that barrel machining. So there's no external parts whatsoever with this, which is very interesting for something of this time from the late 1800s. What else is interesting about this extractor is not necessarily the extractor itself, but the release mechanism for it. You can see that it's this rather long lever here that comes back to where the thumb would be, and it actually it pivots around a point right here and releases off of this little nub that's actually part of the barrel machining. And when that releases up, it allows the barrel to fling down, and then as the barrel swings around, the extractor actually is then kicked up from there. But you have two hooks on either side of the barrel that holds it in place, which is rather interesting. Most shotguns will have, you know, some sort of like a top lever that you push off to the side or something. It's just kind of holding it in one place, whereas this pistol has it where you've actually got two hooks on either side of the barrels. And keep in mind, I've been referring to this as a shotgun the entire time, and this is actually a pistol, right? But another thing that you also got to keep in mind is that the Lancaster company is mostly known for their shotguns in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And so you see a lot of the stuff that is integrated into this pistol are actually features that you will see on shotguns. So halfway through making this video, I kind of came to the realization that there's not much to talk about the receiver, because I don't really have this opened up to really talk about what's all going on in here. And in addition to that, talking about the trigger, I'm kind of also going to be talking about the firing pin, the rotating firing pin, and how that operates, because they kind of go hand in hand. So I'm just going to kind of combine that all into this last section here. So starting off with the trigger, this is actually a optional feature, is to have this set trigger. So how some of these handguns come, and which was pretty much your standard model, is you would just have a heavy double action trigger pull. So every time you pull the trigger, it is rotating the internal firing pin and then also firing the handgun itself. So, you know, think of a double action revolver in that regards. And what the set trigger does is you can pull that, and that rotates the firing pin inside of it, and then you just have a nice little hairpin trigger that you can use to fire. And that can be used for more accurate shooting, or say target shooting. And so it's a really nice feature, optional feature that came on these firearms. And I'll show you here on the inside. Let me lock my camera view here a little better to kind of show. So what I'm going to do is, as I pull the trigger, you can see the firing pin moving around. And then what's nice about this is if I pull the set trigger, it makes it so much easier. Now, what's interesting about this, and one thing that I didn't quite expect it to do, is if you pull the set trigger and you keep pulling it multiple times, you'd expect it to cycle the cylinders, or to cycle the barrels, but it doesn't. So I'm going to go ahead and dry fire this once to see where I'm at. So I'm in this bottom corner here, and it's rotating this way. So if I were to pull the set trigger back once, I would expect it to go here, and then if I were to release the set trigger without firing it, I would expect the firing pin to rotate up here without actually firing this barrel. And so that's what I'm going to do, is I'm going to pull this twice, once, twice, and then go ahead and dry fire it, and you see it's actually still down here. So you can't just keep rotating the barrels. It does fire in sequential order no matter how many times you pull the set trigger. Afterwards, I can feel it's actually not rotating the firing pin anymore when I keep pulling it. So it's just going to keep going to the next barrel. So that's actually a very interesting feature that this has. On that note, I'll go ahead and conclude the first video, as there are not many more features that I can discuss without opening up this firearm itself. If you'd like to learn more about this Lancaster pistol and the features about it and the history behind it, please tune into the next video that will talk more about the history behind the Lancaster pistol.